Hello listeners, this video is an introduction to training for development. I am Dr. Nivedita Narayan, Chief Executive Officer at the Charities Aid Foundation India. This is based on my work on training across many decades, a bulk of which was with Pradhan, a rural development non-governmental organization. Training and retraining are going on within many institutions and are also strategies to realign members of the community with programmatic interventions. With every email or message or mail, we receive announcements of new training programs. Training budgets are increasing for communities, for government staff, for NGO workers, for panchayat members, and literally for every sector. In addition, the importance of training as a means to enhance the effectiveness of development programs is now well established. In this unit and video, we provide an introduction to the concepts underlying the design of training programs for workers like you and me who work with communities directly. These workers are typically from various stakeholder groups that I've mentioned earlier, government, NGOs, panchayats, from villages themselves and communities there who live there. And these diverse stakeholder groups are very important. The focus is now, in the rest of our video, on training and strengthening the capacities of all these stakeholders in the development process. This video draws on the extensive experience of Pradhan and ICRISAT based on development efforts by these wonderful organizations. In India, for instance, there is training for skill building of youth, of women's groups, of frontline workers from the community to provide services in local areas. In this video, we will present an overall view. In the chapter, you will have a case study which talks about training of youth club members to enhance their knowledge and awareness about local food, of local food's nutritional potential. There is a video available of community hunger fighters in Odisha and various other approaches adopted by ICRISAT also. Why is training important? Training is a means to enhance the effectiveness of development interventions and to enable social change. Training and strengthening the capacities of key stakeholders in development are ongoing activities. These aim to align communities being served and other stakeholders with the programmatic interventions and expected outputs and outcomes. Training in this sense is a lever for change. The objectives of this video would be the following four. One, we hope you would understand the concepts underlying training and its importance in the social development sector. We would like you to identify different approaches used in training for development. We'd like you to delineate the stages and processes of training and also to develop a training and capacity building program for your community, the community that you wish to serve. The photo here is of a theatre workshop and training for that where participants and facilitators are eating local dishes prepared by the community and are then going to discuss its nutritional potential. So training is not always in a classroom, in a hotel, in a meeting room. There are very many settings for training, as you can see here. Training and capacity building of community people and other stakeholders has been a key component towards the achievement of the Sustainable Development Goals. The concept of capacity building has now been a part of every national and international social and economic development plan. The Sustainable Development Goal 17 is dedicated to capacity building. It aims to, and I quote, enhance international support for implementing effective and targeted capacity building in developing countries and to support national plans to implement all the SDGs. Realizing the importance of training and capacity building as a means to enhance the effectiveness of development interventions globally, nationally, locally, this video introduces basic concepts underlying the design of these programs for people like you and me who work with communities and with other local stakeholders. What is training? Training in development is a usual phrase used for training and it refers to obtaining or enhancing knowledge, attitudes and skills needed to carry out specific activities or functions. Dear learners, we have discussed knowledge, attitudes and skills and various issues related to this in the behavioral change communication sections and in earlier videos, so I'm not going to go over it again and again. In an organization, typically, for example, a business organization, the area of training and development is undertaken by Human Resources Development Department. It usually refers to the educational activities within a company, within a government, within an NGO or any other organization in the formal sector. It is created to enhance the knowledge and skills of employees while providing information and instruction on how to better perform specific tasks. In general, training helps to strengthen the capacity of individuals and organizations to meet current and future challenges. It includes preparing individuals for their present tasks and sharing knowledge to improve the organization's perspectives and the quality and type of services to the clients. In the case of organizations and workers in development, training is not only an intervention internally to the organization. It is also to the stakeholder organizations that we've mentioned earlier and to the ultimate beneficiaries or end users, such as youth, farmers, women's groups, self-help groups, farmer organizations, youth clubs, and other organizations. Business organizations do not typically train their shareholders, they do not train the customers, they rarely train the suppliers and so on. We've already discussed this in Unit 10 in Innovative Techniques for Behavior Change Communication, where we've emphasized that communication for behavior change is not adequate when it focuses only on individual beneficiaries or end users within the developmental space. It has to follow a total stakeholder mapping. It stresses the involvement of institutional actors and stakeholders. For instance, an effective implementation of a health and nutrition program of the government requires ASHA and Anganwadi workers and even government officials to be trained, besides the women in the villages, the mothers in the community. I'll show you a figure now which will highlight two models of training process, which leads to improved participant behavior and greater organizational effectiveness post-training. The first is a very simple model. On the left, you see the participant and the organization. There's training, and both the participants' behavior and the organization's effectiveness is enhanced. A little more complicated model looks at the participant and the organization as part of a larger system, which leads, and training is not standalone, but we also need to bring about changes in the system, like the performance appraisal system, the monitoring system, various organizational systems. This leads not only to improved participant behavior or practices, but also greater organizational effectiveness. There is a feedback process of how the participant and the organization are supportive to each other and aligned, and that feedback system then is used to improve training and improve organizations. Dear listeners, it's difficult in this video to give details, but I request you to look at the chapter, and there's one more video in this section which will help you to look at examples. So what is training? The benefits of training accrue to both the organization and to the individual, as I've shown you in the earlier models. In the organization, the training and development function rests with the Human Resources Development Department, and staff development also lies within this unit. The individual then enhances knowledge, attitudes and skills, and also receive more information and instruction on how to perform their specific organizational tasks better. Training helps to strengthen the capacity of individuals and organizations to meet current and future challenges. Now, capacity building and training, as we've discussed earlier, related to the SDGs, is a key component of most development projects, whether for NGO staff, government workers, community members, and other stakeholders. The United Nations defines capacity building as the process of developing and strengthening the skills, instincts, abilities, processes, and resources that organizations and communities need to survive and adapt and thrive in a fast changing world. And training is one of the key activities for capacity building, particularly for those interested in Sustainable Development Goal 17.9. If you look here at this picture on the right, it's a schema from an example of the South African local government capacity building framework in 2011. And you can see that it has individual, institutional, as well as general national capacity building. Individual and institutional may be read as individual and organizational. It provides a framework of indicating the constituents of individual capacity building and institutional capacity building. It highlights the various socio-economic, political and economic factors in the macro environment and how these influence the organization and individual capacities. Approaches to training determine the way the training is perceived as a means to bring change or development amongst the target group. From time to time, various concepts have emerged which have changed the way in which training is used in community development programs and stakeholder preparation. Let's look at the assumptions underlying training and learning. Training refers, we are moving now from training to learning. This is connected with block 1, where we've talked about participatory methods where a person is able to take stock and take responsibility for their own learning within a training setting. Acquisition of knowledge of the subject leads to action is the assumption in training. Remember block 1. In learning, we say that skills are acquired through practice. Training talks about participants and that they learn what the trainer teaches. Learning refers to a complex function of the motivation and capacity of individual participants. Training focuses on individual action which leads to improvement of the individual on the job. In the learning approach, improvement on the job is a complex function of individual learning, norms of the working group, and the general climate of the organization. Remember the model I showed you, the little more complicated model. In training, it is the responsibility of the training establishment of the organization, and it begins and ends with the training program. Learning is different. It's the responsibility of 3 partners, the participant's organization, the participant, her or himself, and the training establishment. All phases are of paramount importance to the success of the training effort. The concept of training then focuses on skill and it makes the task of the trainer and the learner complicated. Participants need to have space to practice the skills and not just listen, to learn from their experience and not just others' experience, and the situation needs to resemble real life. Like the training in a base camp before climbing Mount Everest, the simulated situation needs to resemble the pressures, the limited resources, the choices, uncertainties out there, and then generate self-knowledge. This cannot be done by the trainer. A lot of it is on the learner, her or himself. In this context, training as a strategy for change and a systematic attempt to develop human resources focuses on present tasks and situations, and I repeat, future tasks and situations. It deals with the volatility and complexity in the environment, and the trainer's role then expands from being a teacher to identify the goals of learning with respect to the larger roles the trainees are going to play in their professional and personal lives. This signifies that training and action are closely linked. It creates training as a temporary system that facilitates the linkage between the various trainees and the organization, field, end users, and the other stakeholders. For instance, the training system for agriculture workers in the field will involve linkages with the farmers. It will involve sectoral linkages like linkages with the agriculture department, the local seed sellers, the technology providers, market agents. Please refer back to the behavior change communication context of the agriculture production clusters and apply this there. A planning strategy for training then provides 8 steps, and it's required prior to training. I'm going to show you the table just now. The strategy brings the work organization and the training system together. The work organization decides on the change, the specific inputs required in terms of knowledge, attitudes and skills, and the training system responds by specifying what can be acquired through training. Linton and Parikh have written extensively on it and are the seminal thinkers in India and globally on this. Training then as a strategy for change or training for development has two sections, the training system, you see it on the left, and the work organization. We begin with the work organization as you see in the arrows. The organization responds, the training system responds, it goes back to the organization, comes back to the training system. Point 6 shows us how it goes back to the organization and the organization moves ahead. Look at this approach to training and development. It's 3 stages. We've already discussed this in earlier sections on community mapping of resources. Kurt Lewin, as you know, suggested unfreezing, changing and refreezing as 3 stages in any change process, and training for development must follow these 3 stages. Like you must plow the field before you put the seed, you must unfreeze ice before you put color into it to change its color to pink, and refreeze the water to make ice again. At the end, changes are reinforced and stabilized. In refreezing, leaders integrate the changed behavior and attitudes into the normal way of doing things in the organization, and coaching and modeling help to reinforce the stability of training. Let's look at these in terms of pre-training, training and post-training. As designers of training programs, I request you to look at the training program. The purpose of the training is what people have learnt that they now apply. If they do not apply it, it is not useful. This difference in terms of behavior or practices is the measure of the effectiveness of a training program. Keep this in view, dear learners. The theories of training for development suggest 3 phases which include pre-training, training and post-training. These 3 phases can be seen to follow the unfreezing, freezing and refreezing model. The 3 phases have preparation, training and follow-up components. Let me show you a spiral model in the next figure. This looks complicated, but it isn't. The white is the pre-training, the gray is the training and the black is the post-training. It gives you all the steps in each of these phases, and if you look at this, you could use this very easily for your design of the training program. Finally, please look at the black part of the spiral. Improvement of the job on the job is the only way to assess the effectiveness. If a person learns but is not improved on the job, it is not useful for an organizational or developmental change context. It may be personally useful to the person, but it also has to be useful to the organizational or development space. In summary, dear learners, training and capacity building of stakeholders is an important aspect in social development. It transfers knowledge and imparts skill to stakeholders for the achievement of developmental goals. Training and capacity building are ongoing activities and align the community members and other stakeholders with programmatic interventions. The purpose of the training is what people have learned that they now apply. I cannot emphasize this more. The difference in terms of practices or behaviors is the only measure of the effectiveness of a training program. Therefore, for the training programs and workshops conducted at the community level or with stakeholders, it is essential that developmental workers follow proper training processes by identifying the felt needs of the local people and developing appropriate training design. Let me end with an exercise. What are the 3 main phases in the improvement or change in a behavior you want to? What are the technical and complex situations that require improvement? Whose practices need to change? In what direction? Who decides? Would you include your practices as requiring change too? Which of your practices need change? Thank you so very much. This is our group of all our collaborators. I'm grateful to you for listening to me. Bye-bye.